Hi, everybody. It's Bob Oast. This is Theater Resources Unlimited. It's our Friday community gathering. It's September 3rd. I studied beforehand, so I remember what the date is for a change. I never remember it. Happy September 3rd, and happy early Labor Day weekend, everyone. Normally, this would be a vacation weekend. We're at a stage right now in our coming back from the pandemic where I'm going to guess that some of us are going to have special weekend plans, but I'm sure that there's still others who are still sheltering at home and being careful. I strongly suggest that everybody continue being careful. We're not out of the woods yet, but we certainly are closer to being back and open and live. I've actually seen a couple of shows live, including one produced by one of my guests today, Rashad Chambers. Had the pleasure of going to Goodspeed and seeing Little Girl Blue, which was terrific. It was just a terrific experience. And cautiously approaching theater, not as cautious as many audience members, but a little less cautious than some. So I'm somewhere in the middle about it. We're all hoping that theater is going to really return, and that not only will theater return, but maybe audiences will also return. Kind of more important part of that, really. As some of you know, I'm doing town hall meetings now to have open discussions about issues that we're all going through. It's sort of like our community gatherings, but it's a little bit more of a formal discussion where everybody has the mic, everybody has the option of getting the mic. And right now we're talking about returning to live theater and what audiences are going to need. So I just want everybody to know that we're going to be having another town hall meeting on September 23rd. Again, we want to talk about what's needed to get back into live theater and get this business going again. The community gatherings. This is number 70. This is community gathering number 70. 70 consecutive weeks on Fridays at 4:30, where we've brought together the community, theater community, to talk about what they're doing, what they're up to, what their frustrations are, what their successes are. As you've all heard, if you were here for the beginning and the opening from introductions from the room, we have a lot of people in the community that are really engaged and really involved and really doing stuff. Today I'm going to talk to two producers who I admire very much for many reasons. Just the fact that they are producers is worthy of admiration, because producing is not an easy thing to do. But also they have continued to move forward during the pandemic. Neither Blair nor Rashad, I think, although they'll tell the story themselves, but I don't think that they were really drawn to a full halt during all the things that we've been going through. They've found ways to be productive and keep their projects moving. So I want you to meet Rashad Chambers and Blair Russell. And I want them to tell you a little bit about their backgrounds. We're also going to talk about the challenges that you may have had, specific challenges you may have had in your evolution as producers. Blair, do you want to start? Say hello. Say howdy.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine. Can everybody hear me? Because there was some talk about my being too soft before.
I mean, I can hear you, but I like a gentle voice on a Friday afternoon, you know.
Okay, good. I will be gentle and self-conscious now.
Right. How much of an introduction do you want? Just a short introduction now and go into more? But
I'd like to know, I don't know as much about you as I'd like to.
Okay.
How did you get into producing, and what were the steps that led you into producing? And then tell us what happened on March 15th or March 12th. Okay. Actually,
great.
save March 12th. Save that for the next question. I'm going to hear from both of you about
Okay.
What you're
getting into it, and then we'll both kind of answer about where we went from March 12th. So my name is Blair Russell. My pronouns are he, him. I am calling from Mexico City, the land of the Mexica. I am a producer. Sometimes I call myself a commercial producer, creative producer, just a producer, as well as I have many other job titles. the endless job titles, actually, I would say. So I started in the theater, as most of us do, performing. And when I say that, I mean like as a child. I acted when I was very young, and I did that in middle school and high school. And I realized that I was not good at it, and I also didn't like it. So I decided that I loved the theater, but I wanted to do something that was more appropriate for my own skills. So I moved into stage management. And I thought it was a good combination of like sort of left brain, right brain. I got to be on stage. I got to be involved in the day-to-day. I went to school for stage management. I went to college for stage management at the Virginia Commonwealth University, go Rams. And I got my degree in stage management and started my professional career as a stage manager. One of my first jobs was at Cirque du Soleil in Las Vegas. Following that, I worked at the Santa Fe Opera, Opera Santa Barbara, and eventually I landed myself the best job for a stage manager who likes musicals in the world, which is being a production assistant at Goodspeed Musicals. So we'll talk about Goodspeed Musicals later, but I ended up working at Goodspeed Musicals for 3 years, first as a stage manager, and then I moved into the producer's office. I was assisting Bob Allwine and Donna Lynn Hilton in the producer's office, working on the Festival of New Musicals, working at the second space, what was then the Norma Terrace Theater, now the Terrace Theater, now maybe, I don't know, maybe it has a new name. And after that job, after living in rural Connecticut for more than long enough, I decided to travel around and then moved to the city. Ended up working for Jujamson Theaters, which, as some of you know, is a Broadway theater owner. They own 5 theaters, including the Walter Kerr, the Eugene O'Neill, the August Wilson, the Al Hirschfeld, and the St. James. Did I get them all? I better.
Yes.
And doing that job was really educational for me as far as understanding the very important real estate game that we all go through as producers. So combining my background of being on stage and backstage with producing, my learning about producing and developing new work at Goodspeed Musicals, and then learning about the real estate game with Jujamson, I decided to sort of go off and be a producer myself. So in addition to the commercial producing projects that I do, and I'm going to put a link in the chat so you can see my website. It should go to everyone. I also have many other jobs. So one of my other jobs is I work as a consultant for writers and independent producers on new work with Show Shepherd, which some of you may know if you've been involved. We used to do our own little gatherings, and we still have a lot of independent clients that we work with on helping develop and move their shows forward. I am also the director of operations at a company that I started, which we'll get into more later, called Resounding, which does immersive audio entertainment. I am a co-op member at a co-op called Crux, and Crux works in the VR and XR space. And my particular expertise in the co-op is live performance and entertainment.
So now I understand why Eric Rothman is here. That's his area.
And my last, not my last job, my second to last job, or my newest job, actually started yesterday, no, 2 days ago. I am lecturing at Princeton this semester on doing the Princeton Atelier with Georgia Stitt. And we are teaching, Georgia's writing an oratorio, and we brought in all these students, and they're each taking a movement of this oratorio, and I'm kind of helping them as an advisor on producing, whether they want to do something live or virtual or film or whatever. So working with Georgia Stitt and Shelley Williams on that. I also sit on the board of New York Theater Barn. And if you, a lot of you probably know about New York Theater Barn. New York Theater Barn also helps in the development of new work. It's another website for you if you don't have enough websites. And so I'm the board president, co-board president of New York Theater Barn with Matt Schicker, who some of you know. And then I also am the vice chair of the board of the New Harmony Project out of New Harmony, Indiana, which does development and retreats for writers of all spaces: film, television, books, novels, theater, whatever. I think I hit everything, but that's me.
Is that all, Blair? Is that all?
No, I mean, that's not all, but
what do you do to keep busy?
Yeah, I know. I just take a lot of naps. I have a lot of downtime. No, yeah, that's the list.
So Rashad, you have to follow that, and I'm sure you can.
I'm not doing all that, but hi everyone. I'm Rashad. I am a producer, talent manager, and lawyer. I spent 10 years or so creating and developing new work. I initially became interested in producing just from the idea of creating. I grew up in Pittsburgh where there was a lot of art and theater. I grew up watching people like Billy Porter and Michael McElroy perform when I was younger, and just really fell in love with theater, even though I didn't want to be a performer myself. So I moved to New York about 16 years ago and have just been working and growing and learning everything I can about theater, and eventually got to Broadway as a co-producer on American Son, Ain't Too Proud, Betrayal, The Inheritance, and next up is Carolina Change. And I have been developing 2 new musicals as a lead producer, Little Girl Blue, the Nina Simone musical, and It Happened in Key West, which had its premiere in London 3 years ago. And yeah, it's been an interesting journey, and I've over the past year have met a lot of wonderful producers, including Blair, and I'm happy to be here sharing space with him.
And happy to have you. Thanks, Rashad. So let's go back to either March 12th or March 15th, depending on where you want to count the start of the shutdown. What were you working on, and how did the shutdown affect what you were doing? Rashad, let's.
You want me to start?
Yeah, I know some of what you did. I saw it.
Yeah,
I saw
so
what
March
you did.
12th. March 12th was the day of our invited dress for Carolina Change. That was canceled, obviously. And I was also in the middle of my negotiations for my option agreement for Little Girl Blue at that time. So I finished it in April of 2020 and was working on It Happened in Key West as well to find a new director and also start thinking about what theaters we wanted to take it to for our US premiere. And I kind of just continued that journey throughout the pandemic. So I really didn't stop at all.
You didn't stop. You were continuing the same process, but I'm sure it kind of must have slowed things down a little. Or the problem that we're all faced with is we don't have, and there's so many variables. We don't have any absolute knowledge of what's going to happen when everything starts opening. And so how do you plan?
We don't. So I guess each musical is different. So with Little Girl Blue, once I got the option, I basically figured out how I was going to pay for some things early on my own. And I hired a GM pretty quickly in the summer of 2020 to start working on the budgets and really start getting a head start on theaters. Even though we didn't know when theater was going to reopen, there are only a handful of off-Broadway theaters. So I wanted to get a head start on reaching out to see what availability would be. And I worked closely with my GM on just putting together a budget and figuring out the right theaters. And then I also started working with the writer and director to just keep examining the script to figure out how to make it as tight as possible. And in the midst of, I guess, fall, winter 2020, somehow theaters around the country started making plans for 2021. And I had a handful of theaters reach out about wanting to produce Little Girl Blue, even though it hasn't been licensed yet. The first theater that approached us, Equity wouldn't approve it because they wanted to do it inside. And so that went away. And then Donna Lynn at Goodspeed approached us and we started planning about how we can do it outside, which is what we just did. We did a 4-week run outside under a tent at Goodspeed, and it was incredible. Even though we didn't have all the bells and whistles that we had inside, we were all able to find a really dynamic way to continue with the storytelling, and the entire Goodspeed staff and team just jumped in and gave their all. And we surprisingly had a lot of sound and lighting cues for being under a tent. So
here we go. Get in.
I'm excited. Hey, Mary. I'm excited to keep exploring and letting the show develop even more. And then with the other show,
let me just explain to everybody because I did see the show. I had the experience of it. First of all, how many seats did they have? How many actual seats did they have? I know they didn't use them all in the tent.
I'm gonna say somewhere around 200. It might have been a little bit more, but they had some roped off because of COVID seating.
So what happened was that they put these seats in pairs, and there was always one seat between each pair of seats that was not sold. So that was how they approached social distancing. I was relatively comfortable. They also asked everybody to be masked, and most of us were masked. And
well, masks were optional because it was outside. A lot of people did wear them. All the ushers wore them.
Yeah.
But yeah, it wasn't required.
And the other thing was, I don't think they didn't check vaccination status, but they in their materials said that you have to be vaccinated.
Yes, all of the actors and all of the crew members were vaccinated.
Okay, so to go on to the other project. So I just wanted to clear that up for the room.
Yeah, no worries. So with it happening in Key West, we really we kind of took a little bit of a pause on it, just because we knew that nobody was producing, and we wanted to do a little bit more development. So we were just kind of talking through the project, but it wasn't really until maybe October, November that we really started having meetings with theaters. So we started in the fall of 2020 to try to land a production in the fall of 2022, because regional theaters plan their seasons a year in advance. And from those meetings, we ended up getting an offer to do a work session at Bristol Riverside Theater in Pennsylvania. And we're going to do that at the beginning of October. And we are hoping that they like the show and want to program it for the next season. But we're also talking to, 15 other theaters about productions in 2022 as well.
Blair, so what are you up to? What happened to you on March 12th?
It's so funny. I would say like this, right? Currently, it feels the most like it did back then, since I think the beginning, because we're making plans again and things are sort of unknown. And so that's a little bit scary, but exciting because everything's opening. So that's the positive part.
It's interesting because essentially there are still variables, but we're
right.
being a little braver about it now.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's tools that we have now that we didn't have then, and knowledge. So that makes a big difference. But March 12th. So I was in South Africa. I took a trip to South Africa at the end of February of 2020. And I was really excited. So I was in South Africa. I had gone to South Africa in November of 2019 with a friend on a whim. I had an amazing time. And one of the things I really, really enjoyed about the trip was that I got to go to the theater and I got to experience, it's a small market, it's a small industry for theater. There's a couple of major theaters in Joburg and in Cape Town. And I was just really excited. Like I loved going to the theater and seeing it. And I was really kind of inspired by it. And then I had this thought, like, we do a show, we do it in New York, and then we go to London or vice versa. And then we go to Australia. And then, it's sort of like, those are the only markets that matter to the producers. Everything else is sort of secondary. But South Africa is an English language market that has never really been tapped for commercial production. In fact, the rights to things are just given away. I know the one commercial producer in South Africa who gets the rights to all of the major shows. And so I was having these conversations with the theaters there, like the Baxter Theater in Cape Town and the Market Theater in Joburg. And the Baxter Theater was super, super excited to start conversations about bringing slave play to South Africa. And I was like, that's a brilliant idea. And I was coming back and I was going to talk to our lead producer and we were going to make this plan to have slave play in South Africa. And then obviously that didn't happen because on March 12th, I'm still in South Africa and I'm seeing New York is shut down. On March 15th is when I'm flying back. And like the next day, things shut down in South Africa. So I'm literally flying back. I land in New York. It's March, it's miserable weather. So I actually decide to continue and get another plane and come down to Mexico City for 2 weeks. And then ended up I haven't been there nonstop since then, but pretty much I had a few months in New York earlier this year. But I immediately started trying to wrap my head around what it meant for the projects that I had in development. Luckily, I had nothing that was opening in the season. Slave Play had just closed in January, and I was really focused on the early days of my own personal projects. And so I started kind of trying to figure out things that I could do that didn't feel like a substitute for what we wanted to do and felt like they were whole. So the first thing that we did with Matt at Show Shepherd, we did what we called the at-home theater series, and we put together a series of one-person shows that could be streamed from people's living rooms. So I just called people I knew and I was like, you have a one-person show, do you want to do it? And this was like March 27th, I think, was our first performances for this. So this was very early when I started streaming things. And so I sort of did that. And then I was like,
I want to commend you. You moved very fast.
Yeah, I mean, it felt like an easy thing. So I sort of did that and was like, that was great. What's next?
Well, that's what we call the pivot.
I mean, I would say I pivoted.
You did more of a pirouette than a pivot, but
I did do a pirouette very quickly. So by the end of March, I was done with streaming and YouTube and all of that. So I was like, what's next? I got a call. Actually, I had a random connection, so almost simultaneously on LinkedIn from a woman named Lauren Ruffin, who is the co-founder of Crux. And we were just talking and I said, I want to do live theater in virtual reality. So in about a month, which was that, like, I was like, I want to do this. And they were like, let's do it. And I was like, okay, when are we going to do it? And they're like, let's do it in August. And I was like, wait, what? Because in theater, we're like, let's do it in 2030. In August of that, we were putting on this virtual reality performances. I commissioned 3 playwrights to write short plays, found 5 actors, and we did these performances in virtual reality. We started what we call the Black Imagination series, and we're still continuing to explore that today. We've done work with theaters like the Actors Theater of Louisville, New York Live Arts. We worked with Mozilla for the Mozilla Fest and have done commissioned work for them. So we're continuing to explore and build partnerships with theaters to do live performance. We actually did a musical-ish thing. Music is very hard, as you all know, to do virtually. So that's been really fun. That's been a really good way to sustain and continue to develop and work on projects. And actually, I found work that I love that I would love to continue to explore in other capacities from doing it that way. In addition, at a similar time, my now friend, who I've loved, but at the time was just somebody I didn't know, Steve Wargo. He's a writer. He's a book writer on Triassic Park, if you remember that fun classic cult comedy about dinosaurs, what happened to the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park. He came to me and was like, I'm really interested in figuring out what the modern radio play is. And so we together started brainstorming with another partner of ours and came up with what is Resounding. And with Resounding, we wanted to do live, immersive entertainment, audio entertainment that people could do remotely. So we had all of our actors performing remotely, and I'm sitting here sweating because I'm dealing with 8 different internet connections and live audio and live mixing. All the sound cues are being thrown live, the music's being played. So it's like doing all of that was really exciting. We did Dracula with Norm Lewis. We did Treasure Island with Rob McClure. We did Nutcracker with Storm Lever and Telly Leung. And then in the spring, we actually did performances in person at Radio Park in Queens. So we had our cast.
So let me ask you something, Blair. Has this pivot changed the way you're going to do business in the future? Is this for now, or is this who you are now? Is this who you are now?
This is who I am now. I don't know how to answer that question. That's a really interesting question because I don't do one thing, and we'll talk more about that. Like,
let me ask you a more specific question. Do you think you'll return to producing commercial theater?
I already am. I already have I was going to get to that, Bob. So we did that. I actually did live in-person performances in Queens where we had the cast on stage. And this was like the days of I had to wear a face shield just to be there. They're socially distanced. We have a live audience. We're broadcasting. And that was really, really exciting. We did 3 shows there as well. In the meantime, I also have been simultaneously still continuing to work on my own commercial projects. So one project that some of you might have seen is actually I put together with Out of the Box Theatrics and the Holmdel Theater, a production of The Last 5 Years that was done as a streaming. We called it a stream, but it was really like a film, which luckily the New York Times really liked. That was really popular. So that's a project that I've been continuing to explore. What's the possibility of doing that in person? So taking the interest that we built from doing the stream and this film version and actually putting it on the stage. And I also have kind of all the shows that I was working on, because I had a number of shows that I'd optioned before, or shows that I picked up during the pandemic. I've been doing virtual readings of shows. One of my shows, A Patient and the Heathens, we did a virtual reading. I released a cast album for a show that I had in production. We produced a whole concept album virtually. It's a UK-based project. And now I'm using the cast album to build interest in the UK market from producers. And that came out on July 30th, so you should stream it, give it a listen. And then actually returning to live performance, my show that I'm one of the general partners on, Lizard Boy, will be opening at TheaterWorks Silicon Valley, which is the 2019 Tony Award winner for regional theater. That will be opening on October 9th. So I have a few more weeks here in Mexico City before I had to go to Silicon Valley. But I just kind of been pushing everything, both myself, my projects, and what I believe to be producing simultaneously through the pandemic. And honestly, I would say I've never been busier. There's been moments where I was never been more tired or more broke. And I have
it's clear
yeah.
It's clear that your answer to my question, which would have been how has the pandemic changed you? We've clearly heard that answer. We clearly hear that you're taking the lessons of Shutdown with you into the future. I want to talk to turn to Rashad. Rashad, what are the things that you learned during Shutdown that you can apply going forward? Anything, or was it just business as usual but more slower? How can anything be more slow than theater, and in terms of developing a show? But this managed to turn the pace down a few notches.
I mean, it wasn't slow for me. It was just navigating the unknown. And the thing that I learned is that you have to just keep going and keep having a vision for your work despite the unknown, and being able to figure out a plan so when things come back, you're ready. You know, the expression, you stay ready so you don't have to get ready. So that's sort of what we were, just trying to plant as many seeds as possible so that when things did open back up, we would be ready. And this is what happened. So we got this wonderful production at good speed, and now we're making plans to open off Broadway after the new year.
The interesting thing about theater and life actually is that you have to commit to something in order to make it happen. And there's always this misunderstanding that commitment means something's in stone. Plans are never in stone, and especially in theater. You commit to a path, and when you see something that isn't working, you change your path, you change your plan.
Right.
But you have to start somewhere. So I think one good thing that we can all take away from hearing both of you is that you committed to moving forward without necessarily knowing where it was leading. And
yeah,
I'm sure
I could have stopped working on my option agreement in March. You know what I mean? When theater shut down.
So kudos to both of you for being so active and so involved and engaged. A lot of people did pull the covers over their heads and just disappeared during the past year and a half. They did. There are people who did that. They couldn't face they couldn't adapt. Let's chalk it up to adaptability and flexibility as well. Those are very important tools for life in general. And if we didn't know how to use them before, we were sent to our rooms to think about things for the past year and a half and figure out that life is not a constant. Life is a constant variable. So let me talk to you about your visions, the things that you produce, why you produce what you produce. Rashad, what has attracted you to the pieces that you've attached yourself to? And also, let's also clarify something. You are lead producer on a number of shows, and can you tell the room the difference between a lead producer and somebody that is part of a producing team for a commercial show?
Yeah. So the lead producer or general partner, as Blair mentioned earlier, is kind of like the CEO of the entire production, and they're the one making the choices for everything, both creatively and business-wise. And then under them usually is a team of co-producers or associate producers whose main responsibility is raising money. And if you are interested in learning and growing as a producer, then, as a co-producer, you can also be invited to marketing meetings and co-producer meetings and things of that nature. But everything else, every decision is made by the lead producer or general partner on every aspect of the show. When to open, how to do press, do you buy a New York Times ad, hiring the director, casting, all of those things. So it's really, and there are different types of producers. Some people are very financially driven and some people are more creatively driven. So it just really depends on what your interests are and how you want to navigate this crazy business.
And what are your interests? What is your focus?
Well, I fancy myself a creative producer first and foremost. I'm interested in really being in the trenches with writers and directors and making a show as good as it can be. But I also know that raising money is a necessary evil. So you need to be able to have that skill as well. And it's a very important part, right? You can't do your show without money. So I've had 3 years of raising money for 6 projects. I guess now 7, including Little Girl Blue, where I've learned how to have those conversations with investors. And one of the greatest things that I've learned throughout the process is that people are not only investing in your show, but they are investing in you as a producer. So you need to be passionate about what you're selling. You need to be able to show them that you have a vision and that you are a good leader, because they're going to be counting on you to make savvy decisions and to be able to lead the charge. And not every show is going to be successful, right? We already know that only 20% of shows are financially successful. But I think part of it is making sure, even if it isn't financially successful, is creatively successful, and that you're creating a good experience for everyone around you.
Blair, the same question to you.
Yeah, I've people ask me this a lot, so I kind of have an answer, and I always say that it is traditional stories told in interesting ways, or interesting stories told in traditional ways. I love an interesting story told in an interesting way, but as a producer, that's always the hardest thing for us to sell. Like if you've got a weird story and it's presented weird and it's performed weird, that's like, oh, I'll buy a ticket to that every day. But to pick that up and to know that I can find an audience, that's always really a challenge. I also go by the spoonful of sugar policy. In that the shows that I produce often do have a social message, but the show is not about the message. And that's what I think really has the power to change hearts and minds. I'm producing a show called Lizard Boy, and it's a comic book musical, and you walk in thinking I'm about to watch a Marvel musical, and actually you're watching a story about racial otherness and finding oneself within the world when you look and feel different, but you don't know until you leave and you have the conversation afterwards. So bring me a story like that, and I just love, I would love it any day. So that's kind of the things that I really like to find.
Well, let's segue right into the heart of the matter, which is the theater. The stories that are told in theater have been predominantly white-centric. Is that fair enough to say? I mean, is it
yes.
obvious enough to actually say?
Yes, and
yes.
Even the shows that are not are usually produced by white people.
From a white lens.
So we got a little issue going on in this and in all businesses, but let's focus on our own business right now. Here we are. This is theater. Ostensibly, we're telling stories of all people and all humanity. That's theater's mission, really. We haven't really been doing that very well for many years, like a millennium. Have we changed at all? Are we making any progress in telling more stories? Are we able to show audiences the other faces, other stories, and help them be humanized and help people to understand and empathize and have compassion for people that aren't like them? Where are we?
Yes, we are. And I think that it's happened more in the not-for-profit space than commercial theater. But I think that commercial producers are listening and at least trying to learn. We see it happening now on Broadway. There's been a lot of press about the first 7 new shows that are opening are all written by African-American writers.
And
that's
of course,
the
key issue there is that it has to be a story. I mean,
right.
that's
right.
the problem. Is it's a story,
right? it's complicated because, you know, we're coming out of a pandemic. So there's a lot of conversations about those writers being canaries in a coal mine and trying to figure out whether they're actually being set up for success or not. Because if they flop, then people can say, oh, well, see,
we tried it.
Why they're not happening. But I think we as a community have a responsibility to say, this is not a one-time thing. You know, we're going to make sure that every season we're going to commit to hiring diverse writers and directors and across the board, so that we can make sure that the theater community is indicative of what real life is truly like. So I'm excited and optimistic about these types of conversations so that we can continue to push the envelope and really have diversity within the theater community, and specifically the Broadway community. Because like I said, you know, New York Theater Workshop, Vineyard, those type of places have always been doing dynamic and diverse work. But on Broadway, you know, the scales usually tip for the things that have recognizable names. So that could be a catalog musical, that could be a movie musical. You know, there aren't a lot of original works that are really embraced. So I'm hoping that we can sort of shift that and allow more people to have opportunities to have their work produced.
Were there any points in your development as producers where you thought that you were banging your head against a wall? Were you able to easily gain entrance into the community, or was there resistance?
Easy, no. But for me, I knew that it was something that I was going to do. So I wasn't going to let it stop me. You know what I mean? And it wasn't necessarily about race, even though I didn't have any mentors. When I moved to New York in 2005, there were 0 Black producers, period. Unless you count like the Whoopi Goldbergs of the world who did, you know, Thoroughly Modern Millie. And then slowly but surely they started to kind of trickle in. But it wasn't until 2008 when Stephen Burton and Leah Jones Harvey did Cat on the Hot Tin Roof that we had any Black lead producers on Broadway. And now
Black lead producers whose worlds were being reflected by what they were producing.
That's correct. And now 13 years later, we have 4. So we went from 2 to 4.
I count 7, but all right.
Of shows that are happening right now,
including you. What?
I don't count.
Of shows that are open.
Oh.
Yeah, it's like 4. I always say 5. I think 5 is a round number because there's always like one person who may be in there and maybe their lead producer. But I think you know, we were talking about the different types of producers, but even in the category of like lead and co-producer, there are different types of producers within those, right? So Rashad and I are people who are very hands-on, and our lead producer, we're not like, I mean, maybe Rashad is, but we're not like writing multi-million-dollar checks and being like, I'm a lead producer, you know, like I don't have to do anything. Good luck, go do the show. I'll see you when it's opening, right? We're hands-on with everything that we're doing. And so there are different, as we said, like there are more producers coming in, even now, even on these new shows that are coming. But the people who do producing as a career, it's very small. And the people who are given more than one opportunity, also very small. I think I always like to tell my story of how I got here, because it also speaks to how difficult it can be, because it sounds like I just went from like amazing opportunity to amazing opportunity. But I actually got my first job working for Cirque du Soleil because one of my references was the babysitter of the person who was hiring. I got my job at Goodspeed Musicals, and Mary will appreciate this, because Brad Spockman thought I was a girl. Thank you, Mom, for naming me Blair. I got my job at Drew Jamson because I moved to New York and I said, I'm not going to work in theater because theater doesn't pay enough and I'm too tired. And I went to an agency and I said, I'm a good assistant. Can I be someone's assistant? And they said, ooh, well, you don't have experience in finance or this, but you went to school for theater and we have one person who's looking for somebody who has experience in theater. So I had to like, you know, of course I was so happy, but it was also like, I just happened to show up at the right place at the right time and move through these spaces where I was very lucky, working on Slave Play as a co-producer. I met Greg Noble, who was the lead producer, while I was at Goodspeed. He walked into the office to talk about a project. He was a year younger than me. I was like, who's this guy who's like won a Tony, is a year younger than me? I hate this guy. But then I was like, also, I should probably know this guy because he's my peer. So we had conversations, and that was 2014. And it wasn't until years later that the opportunity for me to be a co-producer came up. That was 5 years of just conversations and raising money, just investing money on shows, not even being a co-producer. And then finally, I was able to take that chance. So it's hard. I don't think it was easy. Yeah.
TRU started our producer development and mentorship program back in 2000. I don't remember what it was, 2007 or 8. And we specifically were looking to support and develop producers of color. And the conversation that I had with people in the community all the time was, I don't know anybody with money. My community doesn't have any money. There's always an assumption among the BIPOC people that their communities were poor, and it's turned out not to be true. It was a false assumption, and I think that
it's less that than like I don't know Will Smith. So like it might be nice, and I'm very happy for people on these shows.
I'm talking about their personal community, their own.
Yeah, I mean, but I can say from my own personal experience, like I don't come from, I can't go to my family members and ask them to write checks. I grew up in a very nice suburb, but there's no art. If you grow up in New York, maybe even if you're coming from a different community, you might have people who both have some money and the appreciation for it. But I still, to this day, lead producer, struggle to expand that network of people I know who both have appreciation for art and theater and have the wealth and are accredited investors and all of these other hoops you have to jump through. So you would be surprised at how difficult it really is, especially when that's not the place that you grew up. It's not your family. It's not your neighborhood. It's not your neighbors or your mom's friend. I do talk to a lot of my producing buddies, and most of them are white men, and they do get their first investments from mom's friend and mom and grandma and neighbor and my old teacher who really likes me. And that wasn't my experience at all because I didn't have those people in my circle. So
perhaps maybe the bigger issue is that there have been no role models. So a young Black theater professional doesn't look at producing as something that he would even think about doing. But nobody's doing it who looks like me. But that's changing now, isn't it? A little bit.
A little bit.
A little bit.
A little bit. I mean, but for me, I wanted the knowledge. So even though there weren't any people of color to look to, I definitely had allies that looked out for me, that would meet with me, and they were really instrumental in me learning and growing. Listen, I was in band in high school, and then I went to law school. So I've navigated majority white spaces my entire life. So it wasn't a deterrent to me. But as Blair was saying, I didn't have family members that could write a check for $25,000 when I was starting. But as a part of my own privilege, I did go to law school, and I do have an MBA degree. So once I got into like the Broadway world in my late 30s, most of my friends were becoming partners or were already partners at firms and at Fortune 500 companies. So I was able to go to them who had seen me hustling for 10 years. So they were like, absolutely, here, I'm happy to invest in your show because we believe in you. So that was my trajectory. And I was able to do a lot of readings that I funded out of my own pocket to grow and to learn and to be able to invite people to those things for them to experience my work. So everybody has their own journey, and producers just have to figure out what it is. You don't have to have people in your family who are rich, but that just means you have to work that much harder to get to know other people who are, because your mom may be a teller at a bank, but somebody at church may be a millionaire. So it's like just sharing your art and letting people know what you're doing is part of the hustle.
And I think Rashad also speaks to something else, which is, I grew up in the suburbs of Northern Virginia and Loudoun County, Virginia. In the early aughts, it was always the richest county in the nation or whatever. And so I'm very privileged in that way. I do not have student debt. I'm very privileged in that way. I am married, so I'm not a one-income household. I'm very privileged in that way, so that my husband can constantly sigh when I have to write a check for something that he knows is never going to come back. There's a lot of, I can speak for myself and say, even coming from a place of a marginalized community within the theater, I have so many privileges, which has allowed me to do a job that is nearly impossible for anybody to do, let alone a person of color who doesn't have that like background and that network around them already. So it's using every opportunity and taking advantage of them and finding the mentors where you can. Donalyn Hilton is a huge mentor of mine. I still speak to her all the time, and I have an email from her today. And I took that as an opportunity, and everyone I could learn from, I did. So, yeah.
The projects that you pick, are you conscious of picking projects that will speak to your own history, your own community? Or do you just gravitate to something you happen to like?
I like to think that I pick things that I like, and as a commercial producer, I'm an audience advocate, so I pick things that I think an audience will like. Whenever I like a show, I always think about what the audience will be for it, because of course I'm going to have to market it one day, but I don't necessarily pick a show because I think it'll speak to a certain audience or won't speak to another audience. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Rashad?
For me, it's storytelling first.
Yeah.
Do I like the world? Do I think that it's something dynamic, and is it something that people will want to not only see but talk about? And then I start thinking about the added elements that go along with it. I don't think that I've done any show that didn't have some sort of diversity within it, but it didn't necessarily have to have a narrative or message about my community or marginalized community. But I definitely like shows to have diversity, whether that be on stage, on the creative team, or something. And I think all of them have, with the exception of one that did have one Black actress in it, but I was the only Black producer. I was the only producer of color on the entire team.
I am the same.
that's the issue here. I mean, basically, we're looking at being in the midst of what we hope is an evolution. It's a long time coming. We're trying to basically get two things. We want to get more producers of color actively involved and engaged and brave enough to enter commercial theater. And for me, that means that we'll have people that will have a vested interest in telling stories that aren't the usual ones that are being told. So I think it's not only the producers, it's also the content. I think commercial theater dearly needs to tell a broader range of stories, and I think we may be on a cusp. We go through this so many times. We've gone through this all the time, where we think something's going to change. There's an outburst of enthusiasm for a moment, and then we're back to where we were. I'm just praying that we don't wind up being back to where we were.
Diversity is infectious. That's my tip to everyone. People make it very, very hard to find people, but it starts with leadership. I don't think that I walk into the room or start a show and I say, okay, these are the boxes, like diversity boxes that I'm going to check. But I had a conversation with my co-producers and they were suggesting a marketing person to me. And I said, I've definitely talked to that person. I also know that there's a woman of color that was suggested to me as a person. I'm just going to go talk to them. And if they're the right fit, great. If they're perfect, great. And if not, we'll talk to your person. But it is me, by being in that leadership position, I get to make all of those choices. And that's why having producers of color is important. It's not about having just a token on your team. It's not about what kind of shows they produce. It's that there can be, I would happily produce a show with 4 all white cast members. And then on the other end, behind the scenes, it could be all people of color. I don't actually care. And I think that's what actually being a Black producer versus being a white producer in the space is about. There's so much effort right now towards showing the work, and doing the work is important. Showing the work is less important to me. if I can look at your cast list and I see it, if I can look at your go on IBDB of a show and you're like, oh, I know that person, I know that, like I know I can see where the choices were made. That to me means so much more. And that's why I think it's like just give up some of the control and let somebody else in, and you won't have to do any work. On Lizard Boy, it's all over our team, and it's just because that's part of my human nature.
Yeah, I was going to say, just being intentional about your decisions. You know, when I got on board with happened in Key West, the show was written by 3 white people, and my producing partner is white, and so that's fine because it's a beautiful story and it's wonderful, but 11 out of 12 actors are Latinx. So once we were getting into the lab and the developmental process, I said to my producing partner, I need this team to reflect what's on stage. So when it comes to giving recommendations for designers or for a music director or a dramaturg to the director, I want to make sure that we're not only including women, but we're also including people of color. And at the end of the day, it depends on who she vibes with and who's going to be the best for the job. But we have to at least have that consideration. And the problem with years gone by is that people of color never even made it onto the list for consideration. And so that's where we need to have the conversation that we can't just have diversity on stage. We have to work really hard to create that throughout the production, which is why I love organizations like Black Theater Coalition, because they're creating fellowships for people of color in all departments. So if you are just graduating from college or you're, early in your career and you want to do lighting design, you can apply for this fellowship, make a living wage so you can just do that and not have to go be a bartender or a cater waiter. You can just work under Natasha Katz or some other legendary designer and really learn so that then you can become that head designer at some point. You know what I mean? So we need to continue these conversations and have these initiatives and then support organizations like that so that we can have more people. Everyone knows diverse actors. Everyone knows diverse directors. There are 0 Black casting offices in New York. I think there's
find a general management office.
There is. You know what I mean? Like it's 2021. We have to change that, and we have to nurture and we have to provide these opportunities for people to grow.
I'm going to +1 Black Theater Coalition because I speak to Warren Adams very frequently. And actually, Bob, you brought up the idea of mentors. I'm 30 years old and I am one of the mentors. Rashad is one of the mentors because there's so few people, and that's kind of the sad thing. And I remember it was like my second or third conversation with Warren Adams, who's one of the leaders at Black Theater Coalition. And afterwards, I literally was like in tears because I realized I had never actually talked to a Black male in a position of power like that in the theater before in my entire life. It was just shocking to me that I'd never had that conversation. And so we need to have more people everywhere, not just on stage. The stories that we tell is important. The people on stage are important, but it has to be everywhere because it's infectious. It comes in. If you have somebody on the design team, they'll be thinking about it. That it's. I don't know how to explain how important it is to not just go to the same old people all the time, or to ask somebody, because I know people. Everybody, if you find one person of color, they know more. So.
Yeah, that is a frequent excuse that's been used over the years. I couldn't find anybody. I couldn't find anybody of color.
Well, now there are databases and spreadsheets and everything.
Oh gosh, there's so many organizations. You have no excuse.
Yeah. I want to open. I have a ton I want to say, but it's just gonna take up too much time. Let me open up the questions from the room. David, I see you have your hand raised. Everybody, there's a virtual hand raise. If you go down to reactions and you open it up, you'll see a virtual hand raise. And I'd like to hear people's input and ideas. David, yes.
Yeah, I know that Rashad teaches
David, you're very loud. Can you turn the mic down a little?
Hey, Rashad. Yeah, so I know you taught at TPOC, Theater Producers of Color, last year during the intensive. One of my friends, Camille Thomas, was a student. What do you think? Are you going to be invested in these types of mentorship programs? Are you going to return to that? What's the future of mentorship for you, too?
Well, I hope it's part of my life every day. I'm not sure if I'm going to be involved with TPOC going forward, but I will be involved in some way. I don't know if I'm going to be the program mentor again, but I try to mentor people every day. You know, when people reach out, I try to make time and space for phone calls, coffees, all of those things, because I think it's very important to give back. And that's why I'm here today, because I want to help other producers learn and grow and be a part of this community.
Okay, Vinny.
And I had to plug the industry standard group because I was talking to your colleagues yesterday, literally. And Rashad is also part of the industry standard group, which I put in the chat. And they're raising money to allow people, maybe even people who are not accredited investors, to be able to participate in the commercial game. And I just want to say, again, like there's words and there's actions, and literally getting lawyers to go figure out how to allow this with the SEC. That is the bravest thing I have ever seen a group of people do. So there are ways to support the change that we want to see.
Thanks.
Thank you, Blair.
Vinny.
I just wanted to talk about this. I have a musical, an a cappella musical. It was at NYMF about 5 years ago. And it was a diverse cast, primarily a Black cast, and we had a Black director. I'm white. And it was commissioned by a Black producer. And anyway, a great New York Times review. It went extremely well. Great music. A lot of from a cappella, from gospel, and also R&B influences. Then I had at the Alliance
Question. We're going to run. You have to leave in 2 minutes.
In the Alliance, then I had another workshop, and it was an all-Black cast. And again, it went really well. It's great music. I had theater sat me down. They loved the show.
Your question, because we're going to lose these people.
Okay. They said it's a Black cast with a white writer. They can't touch it. Since then, I've worked with a Black composer with some new music, but I just wanted to talk about that.
I'm going to answer that because I don't think Blair and Rashad should have to answer that. We're in a moment in time right now. Where it is just a reality that we have to overcompensate. It is not a time for having a play with Black content written by a white writer. That's not to say that you shouldn't do it. I think eventually we're going to reach a point where we can be less self-conscious about that. But right now we have to be conscious, and people are in general are just not going to be comfortable with that, with the optics of that. Is that?
But also just keep going. You know what I mean? Go to other places. If you have people of color in your team, if you have a Black director, somebody may be interested. So don't let one no stop you.
But she was listing a whole litany of no's, I think.
Okay, thank you. Great roles for Black actors.
Let's remember that's true of any show. You're going to get a litany of no's. It does not matter. And there's always reasons, right? So keep going.
Thanks.
They give you the more positive response. Judy Binus. And then, guys, you have to leave. You have to leave. I can't keep you much.
Yeah, I can take one more question.
I'm okay to stay a little bit. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm so glad you brought up the idea of meeting new people and so forth. I think designers need to. People, what do you think of the idea of designers, directors, the people who do hiring, like as for assistants, to take time, 20 minutes at a time, and meeting new people, and seeing how they, what they think, and possibly hiring them as their assistants, because that's where it goes, as you say, So what do you think that's a good idea? Do you think that
what manner of meeting are you talking about? Like creating some sort of format, like a speed date format where
no speed dating. 20 minutes sitting down one-on-one, showing portfolio, etc. And if you like them,
but you're talking about structuring something, making it the purpose of this event.
Not structuring, just as a matter of form. Just
Judy, I will say in my practice as a producer, I hire everyone. I hire a director and I let them hire an assistant director, but I still have to hire that person. So I, at the end of the day, could do make it part of my practice to like look at the team and be like, who is your assistant? I don't want to see just a sea of white faces. And I literally just went out and found an assistant director for a director on one of my shows. And from the leadership at the theater, they suggested somebody to me who was a person of color, and I was able to put them together. He didn't have to do it. He didn't have to take him, but he's a good candidate, and I found it. So,
Natasha was actually telling me that she goes and lectures all over the place, and always gives her card to everybody. Says, if contact me if you contact me. She said not one woman has ever contacted her. It's always the guys. So that's an issue. But I think the designers and the directors who hire assistants need to meet people and say, oh, this is an interesting person.
I'm going to interrupt because I know that Rashad has to leave and he's probably just sweating bullets right now trying to. We're going to keep Blair so we can have another couple questions.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Great meeting you.
Thank you, Rashad.
Rashad, thank you for being here.
Rashad, I see you as always.
You too, Blair. I'll be in touch.
Yeah.
Take care. Thank you.